on my knees. And I was really open I was trying anything and anything anyone threw at me. It was a particular difficult time.
At 61, Brad Pitt, one of Hollywood's most iconic leading men, finally admits something he's avoided for decades. Not the films, not the fame, not the flawless magazine covers. What he admits is far more human, far more unsettling: regret. And that should stop you in your tracks. Because if a man who's been at the very center of Hollywood's dream factory for over 30 years can look back and say, "I wish I had done it differently," then it forces us to reconsider what success really means. Brad Pitt has lived a life most people can only imagine. Academy Awards, billion-dollar box office hits, magazine covers declaring him the world's most handsome man, twice. He's walked red carpets with the biggest stars alive, built a career that spanned genres from gritty dramas to blockbuster franchises, and cultivated a reputation as the ultimate Hollywood leading man. On paper, there should be nothing left to long for. And yet, behind the camera flashes and applause, there were choices. Some impulsive, some calculated, others made in silence. Choices that left scars, not just on his career, but on his relationships, his reputation, and perhaps most importantly, on how he sees himself today. This isn't a highlight reel of Pitt's triumphs. This is the part of the story most celebrities would rather keep buried. The late-night confessions, the moments of shame, the opportunities lost, the bridges burned, the words left unsaid. Stay with me, because each regret doesn't just tell us about Brad's life. It reveals the cost of fame, the weight of silence, and the cracks beneath the golden image Hollywood built around him. The roles he turned down. Hollywood is littered with what-if scripts that landed on one actor's desk, only to become someone else's ticket to cinematic immortality. For Brad Pitt, the sting of a role refused often cut deeper than the sting of a role that flopped. Because a box office bomb fades from memory, but the roles you said no to? Those live on forever, especially when they reshape the industry without you. Take The Matrix. Keanu Reeves may have become synonymous with Neo, but what if Brad Pitt had been the one dodging bullets in slow motion, black trench coat sweeping across the screen? That offer was real. The Wachowskis considered him, pitched the vision, and Brad passed. At the time, it seemed like just another sci-fi gamble. But when The Matrix hit theaters in 1999, it wasn't just a movie. It was a cultural earthquake. Suddenly, Reeves wasn't just an actor. He was the face of a generation's rebellion against reality. Or Apollo 13. Before Tom Hanks launched that film into history, Brad Pitt was offered a key role. He turned it down, choosing instead to star in Seven. Now, Seven became a classic in its own right. But the what-if still lingers. Pitt might have been part of one of the greatest space dramas ever filmed, cementing his place not only in gritty thrillers, but also in historical, Oscar-winning cinema. So why did he pass? Timing, clashing schedules, perhaps bad advice from agents. Sometimes it was fear. Fear of being miscast, fear of repeating mistakes, fear of choosing the wrong script when dozens were offered weekly. In hindsight, he admitted with a smirk, "I took the red pill, and it didn't work out." A half joke, but one that betrays the lingering sting. Because here's the irony. Pitt's career still soared. He became a superstar with Fight Club, Ocean's 11, Inglourious Bastards. He didn't need The Matrix to prove himself. But the regret isn't about money. He had more than enough. It's about legacy. It's about knowing that pop culture history could have carried his face, his voice, his presence. That he could have been the one to define an era, and instead, he watched from the sidelines. And missing a role is one thing. But what happens when the what-if isn't about a script, but about love? Brad's next regret wasn't played out on a Hollywood set. It unfolded in the living rooms of millions, and it shattered the illusion of a perfect marriage. The Jennifer Aniston divorce. It was the marriage that defined early 2000s Hollywood. Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston. America's golden couple. They weren't just actors. They were a brand. Paparazzi camped outside their Malibu mansion. Tabloids fought over exclusive shots of them on vacations, and magazines screamed headlines like "Perfect Love." Together, they embodied an almost fairy tale romance, a safe, glamorous love story fans desperately wanted to believe in. And then, it wasn't. When Brad walked away in 2005, chasing another love on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, he didn't just end a marriage, he fractured a fantasy millions had invested in. For many fans, it felt personal, as though Hollywood's golden glow had dimmed overnight. Suddenly, the man who once symbolized stability became the center of a cultural storm. In later interviews, Brad himself admitted, "I wasn't living an interesting life. I was trying to hide," a statement layered with guilt and recognition. He wasn't just leaving Jennifer, he was leaving behind the version of himself that had been on autopilot, coasting, trying to appear perfect. The backlash was immediate. Remember the shirts? Team Jen versus Team Angelina. It was more than gossip, it was a phenomenon. For the first time, fans weren't united in adoration. They were divided, angry, taking sides. Brad Pitt, Hollywood royalty, became the villain in a narrative he couldn't control. But behind the memes and late-night jokes was something far heavier. Brad's realization that he had failed to show up as the partner he promised to be. Divorce is messy for anyone. But when your heartbreak is printed across every glossy cover and dissected in tabloids, regret cuts deeper. He couldn't escape the constant reminders. Airport kiosks, checkout lines, interviews where her name always came up. And here's the part most people miss. Brad didn't regret falling in love again. That's human. What he regretted was how he handled the unraveling, how he allowed silence and avoidance to define the end. For years, he admitted, he carried the weight of unanswered questions. Think about it. How many of us look back at a breakup and wonder, did I fight hard enough? Did I say what I needed to say? Brad Pitt, arguably one of the most admired men in the world, was no different. Behind the tailored suits and polished smile was a man asking himself the same questions we do after love collapses. But if you think that was the low point, think again. Because his next regret wasn't just personal. It was public, brutal, and it rewrote his reputation overnight. The Angelina Jolie fallout. When Mr. and Mrs. Smith hit theaters in 2005, it wasn't just a movie premiere, it was the spark that ignited one of the most explosive celebrity storylines of the decade. On screen, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie radiated chemistry. Off-screen, that chemistry turned into the real thing. Overnight, Brad went from Hollywood's golden husband to the center of a love triangle that dominated headlines for years. Brad and Angelina quickly became the most talked-about couple on the planet. Their faces were everywhere, magazines, talk shows, red carpets. They weren't just dating, they were building something epic. They adopted children, welcomed biological ones, and cultivated a family that looked, from the outside, unstoppable. For a while, Brangelina wasn't just a couple name, it was an empire. And then, everything fractured. Scandal after scandal hit the tabloids. Whispers of tension on film sets turned into accusations of screaming matches. A now infamous 2016 private jet incident became the breaking point. Reports of a heated argument between Brad and one of his children spiraled into an FBI investigation, court filings, and a custody battle that stretched on for years. For nearly a decade, Brad's name wasn't tied to his acting. It was tied to conflict, lawsuits, and endless speculation. In a rare moment of raw honesty, Brad admitted, "I hit the lottery, and then I lost it." That sentence, simple but devastating, revealed the truth behind the polished tuxedo smiles. Brad Pitt, Hollywood's eternal leading man, was unraveling in public view. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Fame magnifies regret. When you and I mess up, only a few people know. But when Brad Pitt messed up, The world dissected every detail. Tweets, tabloids, hashtags, his worst moments became clickbait. Imagine your most painful fight, your most shameful decision, replayed for millions of strangers to judge. That's the reality he lived through. And yet, Brad's deepest regret wasn't only about Angelina or the breakup of their marriage. It was about what fueled the collapse in the first place. The demons he had been hiding for years: alcohol, anger, patterns of self-destruction that he thought he could keep tucked away behind charm and charisma. For a long time, he did what many of us do: mask the pain, smile for the cameras, pretend everything is fine. Until one day, it wasn't. This was the moment when the world saw not just the actor, but the human being behind the Hollywood myth. The man who could command the screen couldn't control his own home. And for Brad, that became one of the most haunting regrets of all. Not simply losing Angelina, but losing himself in the process. But if you think that's the end of the spiral, it isn't. Because the next regret dug even deeper. Not into his love life, but into his very survival. Addiction and self-destruction. Brad Pitt once admitted in a rare, unguarded interview, "I was drinking myself to death." Not a metaphor, not exaggeration. He meant it. For years, alcohol wasn't just a vice. It was a crutch, a companion, a way to quiet the noise. On film sets, at glittering parties, even in the solitude of his own home, the bottle was always nearby. He confessed that he couldn't stop, even when he knew it was costing him the people and the life he loved most. Here's the brutal truth. Success doesn't cure loneliness. Fame doesn't erase pain. Money doesn't patch the holes in your chest. Brad Pitt, a man with Oscars, mansions, and endless acclaim, still ended nights staring at an empty glass and feeling even emptier inside. And that is perhaps the hardest regret of all, realizing you had everything, and yet chose to escape from it. The wake-up call came in the most personal way possible: his children. Friends say Brad would look at their photos, then at his own reflection after another night drowned in alcohol, and whisper, "This isn't the man I want them to remember." That moment of recognition didn't erase the damage already done, but it sparked a shift. For Brad, sobriety wasn't about headlines. It was about survival, about reclaiming a self he had almost lost completely. Getting sober became his battle. He sought therapy, joined Alcoholics Anonymous, and started speaking openly about the shame that once defined him. He admitted that for years he masked anger, loneliness, and pressure with alcohol, telling himself he was in control when he wasn't. He described his recovery as a daily fight, one that continues even now. Because addiction isn't something you cure, it's something you manage every single day. And here's where regret sharpens its edge. Brad doesn't only regret the drinks themselves, he regrets the moments they stole. The conversations blurred by intoxication, the birthdays missed, the emotional presence he couldn't give his children because his focus was on the next glass. To him, it wasn't just a bad habit, it was self-sabotage. And unlike a lost role or a broken marriage, this regret cuts across every part of his life. Think about it. Fame shields you from many consequences, but addiction strips away the mask. It doesn't care how many Oscars you've won, it doesn't care how many magazine covers you've graced. Addiction levels everyone, and Brad Pitt found himself as vulnerable as anyone else, if not more so, because his collapse was playing out under the public eye. For him, sobriety is not just about health. It's about rewriting his story before it's too late. And yet, regret doesn't always come from what you did. Sometimes, it comes from what you failed to do. And for Brad Pitt, the next regret still aches the most: not being there for his kids. We've all seen the images. Brad Pitt at airports, a toddler on his shoulders, another holding his hand, cameras flashing as the family made their way through crowded terminals. To the outside world, it looked picture perfect. The modern-day Hollywood father, juggling fame with fatherhood, building a large, blended family that seemed like a fairy tale. But behind those photographs, the truth was harder. Brad's reality was pulled in a dozen directions. Grueling movie shoots that kept him on set for months. Endless press tours that carried him from continent to continent. Court dates during the custody battles that stole not just time, but peace of mind. And then, the most painful thief of all, his own addiction, which consumed the very hours his children needed most. Years later, in moments of raw honesty, Brad admitted the weight of what he'd lost. He confessed to missing birthdays, school plays, first days, and milestones that no photo shoot or award could replace. He reflected simply, "Being present is the greatest gift." I didn't always give that. For a man who has collected every prize Hollywood can offer, that admission was more devastating than any bad review or box office disappointment. Because here's the reality. Awards can be replaced. Roles come and go. Even reputation, bruised as it may be, can be rebuilt with time. But the one currency you never get back is time with your children. Once it's gone forever. And that is the wound Brad Pitt has openly admitted still aches. Think about your own life for a moment. How many dinners did you skip because work called? How many phone calls went unanswered because you thought you'd make it up later? For most of us, those small lapses sting. Now, imagine them magnified by years of distance, public chaos, and private demons. For Brad, those absences became scars, memories he wishes he could rewrite, moments he knows his children will remember more vividly than any movie he ever made. And that's where regret cuts deepest. It's not measured in lost dollars or roles refused. It's measured in bedtime stories never told, hugs missed at the airport, and conversations that might have changed everything but never happened. But if you thought regret stopped with career choices, broken marriages, or even fatherhood, think again. Because Brad's final confession wasn't about films or family, it was about silence. The silence that almost swallowed his entire story, staying silent too long. For decades, Brad Pitt was Hollywood's mystery man, polished on the red carpet, poised in interviews, rarely vulnerable. He seemed untouchable, almost above the noise. And for a while, that silence worked. It gave him an air of control, of mystique. But in that silence, something dangerous happened. The media filled in the blanks. And when you leave room for the tabloids to write your story, they will. Some versions were true. Most weren't. Brad now admits candidly, "My silence protected me, but it also buried me." Those words reveal the double-edged sword he carried. Silence can keep you safe in the short term, but over time it becomes a prison. By keeping the mask on, by refusing to defend himself or share his truth, he allowed a narrative to grow that painted him as either Hollywood's golden hero or its most notorious villain, depending on the week. And here's the kicker. Silence isn't always strength. Sometimes silence is surrender. Every time Brad chose not to speak, he handed away a piece of his story to others. He let strangers decide how he would be remembered. For a man whose job is to embody characters, he found himself trapped in roles he never chose. Roles written for him by gossip magazines, headlines, and rumor mills. For Brad, the regret wasn't just about losing control of his image, it was about losing connection. With fans who only knew half-truths, with friends who wondered what was real, and most of all, with himself. Because when you hide for too long, you forget what your own voice even sounds like. That silence, he admits now, was one of the costliest mistakes of his life. 6 regrets. 6 shadows chasing a man who seemed untouchable. From missed roles to broken vows, from addiction to absence, from silence to shame. And yet, here he is, still standing, still creating, still learning. Brad Pitt's story isn't just about regret, it's about growth. Because regret only matters if it teaches you something. And for him, each wound became a scar that shaped the man he is today. So, which of Brad's regrets surprised you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.